Coming up on this first edition of the Prime Factor, Pokemon Sun and Moon leaked onto 4chan and the entire plotline is strung across Reddit. We'll make some sense of that, as well as Blizzcon happening over this weekend. A new Hearthstone expansion has been announced, and there were a couple esport tournaments. We'll get to those and a couple more in our Esport Roundup. In other news, video game voice actor strike still going on as they've moved to Warner Brothers Studios, and now EA and Origin, the old site of the voice actor strike, is having a little bit of controversy of countries overseas. We'll have that news as well as the release of the week in this first edition of the Prime Factor. Hello YouTube viewers from around the world, and welcome to the very first episode of the Prime Factor, where we break down gaming and esport news down to its simplest form. My name is James, aka Primetime, and this is what's happening in the world as I see it. But before we begin, two quick apologies. Number one, I am just getting my voice back right now. I have not had it over the weekend due to an illness. And the second that I could speak normally, I made this video, so apologies in advance. And secondly, the gameplay in the background shows that I am completely bad at our release of the week, which is Call of Duty 4 Remastered. This game is a love letter directly from Infinity Ward to the Call of Duty community, and honestly, this was one of the smartest marketing moves by the Call of Duty franchise since the adaptation of supply drops. Now, of course, they're not going to make as much money on this one single game as they will by selling random skins and weapon variants through random supply drops. However, it did spark the interest of the Call of Duty community enough to go out and buy a more expensive edition of Infinite Warfare, which, to be quite honest, is on the same path as Advanced Warfare and Black Ops 3. It's a path that most Call of Duty fans that like the boots on the ground gameplay would not want to play, so therefore having Call of Duty 4 Remastered probably will set this franchise up for the next 3 years, and this gives an opportunity for Activision to focus more on their actual franchise. It's kind of like a parent with their two children, and of course this analogy proves while I probably will never have children, you have one side of the community represented by one child that's constantly crying, wanting to go back to an old home. But the fact of the matter is that Activision just put down the deposit for this home in space, let's call it. So they've come out with Call of Duty Modern Warfare, and they basically put a pacifier into the mouths of those fans wanting to go back to the old days. Meanwhile, for the other child that's very happy to move on, thrive, and prosper, they're going to focus more on him and make sure that all their ducks are in a row for Infinite Warfare. Because to be quite honest, when Advanced Warfare dropped and when Black Ops 3 came out, and then when the trailer for Infinite Warfare showed people double jumping, it's pretty clear that the Call of Duty franchise is moving away from boots on the ground to a double jump, more arena style shooter. And unfortunately, it's a pill that the Call of Duty community has to swallow. If not, they can do their best to force Call of Duty 4 down the throats of Activision and keep it going. But that's something to definitely consider in the closing argument when I talk about Infinite Warfare. Now going over to Activision's biggest competitor, EA. There was a huge issue with Origin and giving access to players that purchase games from foreign countries. A Reddit user by the name Trivial Sublime brought to the attention of several media outlets that he bought hundreds of dollars of video games on the Origin site, and when he logged onto the site one day, he got a bizarre access denied message. He basically Googled it from there and found that Origin is no longer available in his country, Myanmar. EA then took to a response by saying, quote, EA is legally required to restrict online services to residents of countries that are embargoed, end quote. This embargo is due to U.S. law against certain countries that companies can't have economic transactions with. Essentially, if you're an American country and have to do business with a country like North Korea, you just can't. It's that simple. Then, an Iranian player took on to Reddit and reported the exact same thing. His account access was revoked after purchasing several games, and EA then took to the specific countries that they have to comply with. Origin, quote, is not available in Cuba, Iran, Myanmar, North Korea, Sudan, Syria, and Ukraine in the Crimea region. So this all makes sense, right? You have several countries that, of course, have certain problems politically that the U.S. does not want to have any economic relations with. But then you dig a little bit deeper. Myanmar and U.S. relations wound up being smoothed over in September 2016 when the state councilor of Myanmar visited the United States, met with President Obama, and he lifted the executive order-based framework that basically had Myanmar sanctions put on. So yes, Myanmar sanctions were lifted in September. Now, do you see the issue here? A user logs on in October to an Origin DRM website and obviously has purchased hundreds of dollars worth of content on this website. He then logs in one day, several weeks after the embargo is lifted, and he no longer has access to his account because EA is legally required to restrict online services. I personally do not think that that is a legitimate excuse for that problem. Because, first off, how is this person purchasing games in the first place when sanctions were already put in? This basically assumes that EA is retroactively banning players from countries where there were embargoes set. And this sets up a very dangerous precedent for DRM, or basically buying games online, not with a disc and not in a brick and mortar store, put forth by this action. When you retroactively ban a player who purchased your product and then saying a year or two later, nope, sorry, you don't have access to that, that's kind of a bit of false advertising, because when you buy a game, you expect to own that game indefinitely until you, the consumer, decide to sell it. And of course, DRM and online transactions basically take that last part of the equation out of it. When you have an online game, you can't turn around and sell it to someone else. You own that indefinitely. Now, there's an issue that if you're in a country, let's say, I don't know, Canada, and there's all of a sudden a sanction put onto Canada where you can't legally purchase anything from the United States anymore, that's not going to stop EA from basically pulling all of their content down off the server when a Canadian player purchased Battlefield 4 last year when sanctions weren't put into place. There hasn't been much other news coming out of this situation, as from what I'm seeing from all the different web outlets. No real word has been had about this player or other players that have experienced this problem, and EA has not put out a direct statement against it, except for a couple support threads and other pieces of Q&A content. But this really opens the door for EA to come out and basically apologize for these actions. Now, you don't want to be doing any dealings with countries that you shouldn't. Nobody should be giving a copy of Battlefield 1 to Kim Jong-un. It's that simple. But at the same time, when you have a country like Myanmar that all of a sudden has access to these products, you can't be banning them for no reason. There's no sanction, there's no embargo on this country, and there quite frankly isn't a reason for EA to step up and say, hey, every single person in Myanmar can play our games because there is no US law against it. Unfortunately for Iran, that same logic isn't going to fly. Unless the Iranian war and the conflicts out in the Middle East end, then unfortunately players out there and gamers out there aren't really going to have total access to American-made content. Another controversy that EA is involved in is a strike of the SAG-AFTRA, or if you don't speak acronym, the Video Game Voice Actors Guild. Now, back on October 21st, the strike began after a week prior, the guild decided to go out on strike. Now, the union said that voice actors should be prepared to strike on projects that went into production after February 17th, and the strike should be against 11 companies, which include Activision, Electronic Arts, Insomniac Gaming, Warner Bros. Gaming, Take-Two, Disney character voices, among other smaller companies. And of course, the video game industries say that this has no point, that only about 25% of video games on the market have performers from this guild, and that, quote, any strike would not only deny SAG-AFTRA's membership work, but it would also give their competitors who do not engage union talent a leg up while any strike would be in place. This is from the attorney Scott J. Whitland, who's the law firm representing the industry in negotiation between the guild and the game companies themselves. Now, as it stands, and as many people like to quote, video game voice actors are paid at least $100 an hour plus benefits. But there's a little bit of an issue to that, because a typical video game voice actor is not employed on a typical 9 to 5, 5 out of 7 days a week schedule. A video game project usually lasts for a few months and does not encompass an entire year, with these union actors having to go from game to game, industry to industry, to try and hit that $100 an hour mark. And again, some days they spend longer than others. Some days they may spend 2 hours in a booth. Other days they may spend 10. So treating this like an hourly position is an issue. It's kind of like saying that your little cousin who received $1,000 for last Christmas gets paid about $1,000 an hour a year. Now, several prominent voice actors are part of this guild. Roger Craig Smith of Batman and Assassin's Creed, Jennifer Hale of Mass Effect and Guild Wars, and my personal favorite, Will Wheaton, who is of course made fun of in Family Guy, but also is a part of many different games and actual TV shows and movies, all wanted to authorize the strike and have spoken out in support of it. Now, what the union is proposing is that there should be residual payments and other profit sharing opportunities, which they should have an additional full-scale payment, quote unquote, for every 500,000 units sold. Other things include reducing the recording time for about 2 hours a session because, well, if you're a voice actor, you don't want to go 2 hours hardcore because you're obviously going to lose your voice. So with unconventional standards put into place both for the hours work and the work done, maybe there should be a conversation reopened by the unions and the industry, because in the end, it's not really going to benefit the games industry. You see the production titles that this union is going to strike, and the list goes on. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, for instance, is on that. FIFA 17 as well. NHL Hockey 17 and 18, Brothers in Arms, Kingdom Hearts 2.8, Injustice 2, Lego Marvel 2, Lego Star Wars, Team Fortress 2, and freaking Nick Jr.'s Peppa the Pig Fun with Peppa are all these games being struck. And it's a variety of games that range from games played by your 3-year-old cousin to what you play nightly on your computer. So like most issues between unions and companies, the public is hoping that the strike will end soon. But with the recent picketing of WB Studios, the end might not be in sight in the near future. On a lighter note for Activision Blizzard, they had the wonder of BlizzCon happening last weekend, and the most exciting piece of news out of there, in my opinion, is the new Hearthstone expansion. Love how the new Mean Streets of Gadgetzan look. I think the tri-class faction cards can enter a pretty interesting new twist to the game itself. And to be quite honest, every time there's a new expansion released, I always feel like Card A or Card B are completely overpowered, and then once the game actually comes out with a new expansion, it's a completely different story. So it's going to be very nice to see some new blood be put in to this franchise. Other news includes Diablo 3 adding a retro Diablo 1 style mode, a Necromancer class revealed, a new Make-A-Wish charity pet for World of Warcraft, which props to Activision Blizzard for donating to charity. That is completely dope. The new Overwatch character Sombra got officially revealed. StarCraft 2 is being used by Google's DeepMind as an AI test. And of course, the announcement of the Overwatch League. This is a breaking point in the esports scene because Blizzard Activision is deciding to go the route of more traditional sports. What do I mean by that? Combines for players, teams based in cities, a monthly salary, and really just more of a season atmosphere rather than tournaments strung across the year. This is going to be one of the greatest tests and greatest experiments ever seen in the esports scene. As if the esports wants to be sports with an E, this is definitely the way to do it, to make the experience similar enough to traditional sports, right down to the fact of a hometown team that you can support rather than an organization that spans globally or in just one nation. Now, there's really no word as to whether this league is going to be launched within the next month or so, where the teams are going to be based, or when the combine will happen and their players. But one thing is for sure certain, this is definitely going to be on the radar of every single esport organization, outlet, and watcher in the world. The other thing that happened at Blizzcon was esports, and there was no shortage of that, as several Activision Blizzard esports were played, most of which were Fall Championships and World Finals. Ballistics took home the Heroes of the Storm Fall Championship with a $300,000 take. South Korea took home the Overwatch World Cup. Pavel beat Dr. Hippie 4-2 in the Hearthstone World Championship Final. Beyun was your StarCraft 2 WCS Global Finals champion, and Splice out of the European circuit took home the World of Warcraft 3v3 Arena World Championship and got a nice $120,000 payday. Over to some other esports, IEM Oakland is proving to be a little bit of trouble for some teams, as both Virtus Pro and Immortals are both not going to be heading to the Bay Area. Heroic will be replacing Virtus Pro, and TSM is a surprise addition to the lineup of teams already there. For LCS, you have TSM, Flash Wolves, Unicorns of Love, INTZ Esports, and Chief Esports that are confirmed. Meanwhile, Counter-Strike, there are still teams being confirmed and denied as the event gets closer and closer to its start date. For League of Legends, the LCS All-Star teams were announced after viewer vote. The 5 people for North America were Impact, Reignover, Doubleth, Aphromu, and Bjergsen, with a resounding 66.2% victory over the next bid, which was C9 Jensen at 7.2. Meanwhile, for LPL, you had Mouse, Queerlove, Wheeless, Uzi, and Mata. For LMS, was Ziv, Karsa, Maple, BB, and Albus. And for the EU circuit, you had Soaz, Jankos, PK, Reckles, and Yellowstar. Unfortunately, Steve did not make it. I was kind of rooting for him. Over to another organization, the ASL announced their next Pro League, which will have a prize pool of $2 million in 2017. Each season will have a $1 million prize pool split up into 2 seasons, one that starts on February 7th and ends May 18th, with the finals being the first weekend of June, and the second starting in August 2017, ending in November, and the finals will be happening in December. Match days will be Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and the best of Counter-Strike Go teams will be competing in this. And finally, now to my personal background of Halo. Week 7 is about to start in the HCS Pro League, and Envious, Optic Gaming, and Team Liquid have all punched their ticket to Burbank, California for the HCS Finals. Meanwhile, on the other side of the table, Allegiance is 2-10, so they're pretty much destined for Burbank, but not in the way they want to in the relegation tournament. LOL and Enigma 6 sit pretty much in the halfway point between the final relegation spot and the final Pro League final spot. And they're sandwiched by Luminosity, who currently sits at 6-6 and needs probably one more win in order to clinch that final spot, and Evil Geniuses, who sit at 3-9 and desperately need to win 2 games this week in order to stay out of the relegation zone. Some of those Pro League sides are going to be joined by the top open circuit teams. They're going to compete in 2 separate tournaments during HCS Las Vegas. The top 8 open circuit teams in terms of total points from the Open and Legendary Cups held over 7 weeks during the season will compete for 2 relegation tournament spots in Burbank and may have a shot at joining the Pro League. The 8 teams that made it were as follows: Threes Up, Most Wanted, Game Tyrant, Justice, Contagious, who won last weekend's last Legendary Cup over Game Tyrant 4-0, Daddy in the Daycare, Don't Chase Me Bro, and Shock the World, who beat Set to Destroy X, aka Sicker Than Yo Average, by 25 open circuit points. As someone who interviewed Sicker Than Your Average, knowing Chris and Ooze and all of those guys, it was really unfortunate to see them just miss the cutoff for this. I really hope that they have some other opportunity to compete in professional Halo, because to be honest, they are a very talented bunch of players. Of course, with all that on the line on HCS Las Vegas, another league is being started in Halo, the Halo Minor League. Most Wanted, Panda, Solstice, and Cyan all have spots in this league. With Most Wanted, should they reach the Pro League, their spot will open up. And Orglis and Excellence Gaming have clinched the 5th and 6th spots respectively with the very first open qualifier for this event. Orglis wound up dominating the bracket, losing only 2 games during their entire run, while Excellence were booted out of the second round and made a memorable losers bracket comeback to secure the 2nd spot. We'll see if there's any integration between the Halo Minor League, ESL, and Millennial Esports in the future, but hopefully this marks a new tier of competition right in between the Pro League play and the Amateur Open circuit. And in the last piece of gaming news for this episode, as Kotaku states, brace yourselves, Pokemon Sun and Moon are leaking everywhere right now. There are massive spoiler alerts for new Pokemon, an entire play-by-play of the plotline on Reddit, and a 4chan leak that has the entire game put up in ROM form. Now, of course, this does not really look good for Nintendo, as well as certain people who want to upload early gameplay footage. Of course, there are some people that have access to these games before they're released, and they're, of course, given the benefit of the doubt by Nintendo. They're given the permission to do that. But for other people, be warned, because if you play these copies, for sure Nintendo will be knocking at your door. Nobody moves the needle like Nintendo, and the same goes for Call of Duty, the basis of my closing argument, because in the past week, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare and Call of Duty 4 Remastered were the biggest release of the past week. Forget about Mafia 3, forget about Titanfall 2. You have to admit that Call of Duty still gets people talking on social media, for good or for bad. The good wasn't so much with this release, though. A lot of people didn't like the fact that advanced movement was still in the game and actually blasted the game for frame rate drops, issues with challenges, issues with game modes, including Capture the Flag and Hardpoint, that had pros even upset over it, and overall being upset at the fact that supply drops have exclusive weapons that can only be unlocked through unlocking crates. Now, to play devil's advocate, I am enjoying the game. I'm almost first prestige in that, while also playing Call of Duty 4 Remastered, and quite honestly, it has a couple nips and tucks, but we kind of expect this from Call of Duty year after year, with the hope that for goodness sakes can they just have a clean launch for once. The main argument I want to make, though, is the fact that Call of Duty Infinite Warfare is being called out by these pros. The only game mode that kind of works at the moment is Search and Destroy, but even then one of the maps has an issue and actually has to be reworked by the actual Call of Duty team before the very first event of MLG Vegas. Now, the biggest issue I want to bring up is that some want Call of Duty competitive to go back to COD 4 Remastered. And the argument really is there in full. You have pros, casters, and even guys like Yuke, who's a HCS pro, wanting to come back and play Call of Duty 4 competitively. You have people that are upset with the advanced movement, that say that Infinite Warfare really isn't ready at this point to support a competitive scene with the way that it's patched up so far. And to be honest, Call of Duty has a big catch-22. They brought back a fan-favorite game and yet have to sell their new title to its fan base, especially in the competitive scene. And while Activision has a very tall order, they're just going to have to cut the life support on this. They're going to have to say to their fans that they are fully invested in this advanced movement system. It's been going on for the past 3 games. The pros have been getting used to it. And honestly, when you have guys like Parasite coming out saying that, quote, it doesn't help that none of the pros have the nuts to band together and attempt to play with the double jumps off, end quote, the pros are obviously upset, and if you give them the opportunity to go back to Call of Duty 4, you're basically going to have a community lopsided, not playing your new game, and focused on that one for years to come. That is, of course, if you basically go to the whim of your community and basically get rid of the advanced movement system for your next game being developed by Sledgehammer Games and then by Treyarch. But at this point, you've gone too deep. You've had 3 straight games, Advanced Warfare, Black Ops 3, and now Infinite Warfare, that have this advanced movement, double jumping, wall running system. And having one full life cycle of a new advanced movement system to all of a sudden throw that out the window, yes, at first it's going to please your community. But if you fall flat on your face, you're going to lose a lot of fans that way. So at this point, Call of Duty, by way of not allowing that many Call of Duty 4 tournaments, or just emphasizing the fact that Infinite Warfare is their game to people who are watching and playing it, is pretty much going to allow them to move forward with their franchise. It's something that the community just doesn't want to accept, but unfortunately, boots on the ground warfare will not be coming back to Call of Duty. It's gone way too deep. It's now a double jump arena shooter with wall running and energy weapons. And unfortunately, if they don't like it, then they're going to have to go to a more wartime-like shooter like Counter-Strike Go. So what do you think of Call of Duty implementing modern warfare into the pro scene? Should it be allowed, or should it only be Infinite Warfare tournaments? And on top of that, do you really feel it's necessary for Call of Duty to then go back to its non-advanced movement system after the life cycle of Infinite Warfare? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching this video. Very happy to get my voice back and actually get this thing started. Next week, we'll do our usual release of the week, Esport Roundup, and the rest of esport and gaming news for the past week. But until then, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Prime Factor.